think what it means is the easiest, like in 15 seconds or less, this defense will arrive into 2022 without a single all Big 12 player on its defense from a year ago. This year, you need to exit with 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And if that happens, this defense will be better. I mean, the difference of, hey, we have an all-conference defensive lineman, an all-conference linebacker, and an all-conference DB, that probably means they've got a defense good enough to win the Big 12. Fair. So not an impossible ask. And I don't even know how tough of an ask. That should be happening. Number 5 on the 6 things they have to do. This is the one that might be, I don't know. I don't know what we're asked. I said they've got to be in the top half of the Big 12 in the kicking game on special teams. And looking back at what Cameron Dicker did a year ago, they were in the top third of field goal percentage makes, net punting, and kickoffs. And every game you're winning that part of the battle, it makes winning games on paper easier. It's crazy to think that they had that type of efficiency in the kicking game a year ago and went 5-7, because going into this year, they're not going to be as good in any of those areas. They will decline. How much they decline is going to determine how good they are ultimately on special teams in the kicking game. Not talking about returning punts or kicks, just kicking the football. And in 50-50 games, which Texas is going to be in a lot of these type of games this year, the fine margins can often be in the hidden yardage in the punting game, the ability to make kicks and extend leads from 7 to 10, the ability to be down 7 to make a field. You know what I mean? All these little things that make it so that at the end of the game, you're not on the wrong side of the fine margins. I don't know what Isaac Pearson and Bert Auburn really, I don't know what you can expect of them. I'm not saying they need to be number 1, number 2, or number 3. They need to perform in the top 5. Otherwise, a team that's going to be in a 50-50 game is probably going to be on the wrong side of the margins in the kicking game.
I think you're totally right. It's one of those things, we talked about before. You never know how much you miss a kicker until you don't have one. You never know how much you miss a punter until you don't have one. And so when you get, the 20-yard shank or the 25-yard shank, or you have, the field goals that are missed and you just don't know what to do, like that becomes problematic. I know Texas fans have been don't realize how fortunate you've been to go from Michael Dixon to Cameron Dicker and just not miss a beat over the last catch. How many years are we talking? Like 6, 7 years?
It's been a while now.
Yeah, well, you just can check a box and you don't have to worry about it. And when you see what happens, Catch, when you don't have it, it's a backbreaker. It's such a little thing, but it's such a major thing. And so finding those guys who could step up, and we didn't see a ton in the spring game, especially in the kicking department, that you were like, no worries.
Exactly.
You're like, oh, is this going to be a problem or not? Because I'm not quite sure. Take a mental note to your point. Yeah, they having the consistency again, because Catch, most of these games, to your point, are coming down to a few points, here and there. I mean, you were talking about 3 points and 4 points and things to that effect. And, if you aren't converting and you aren't able to do it, just think about the frustrations Texas fans used to have with Tom and the binder, right? And there were games that you told yourself, man, if this guy just takes the points.
Remember what he told us his wife told him, right? Take the points.
And there were games where you're like, man, if you just took the points, you wouldn't be in a situation. So imagine being in that same situation, and instead of going for it on 4th down, you elect to kick, but you don't have a guy that can do it. It will lead to the same frustrations, just kind of getting there by a different set of circumstances. getting there differently. There you go.
Yeah, and it's amazing they went 5-7 and they were so good in the kicking game a year ago, because it wasn't a team that you ever really had to, Dicker handled kickoffs in such a capacity that it was a surprise when someone returned a kick. I mean, 4 out of 5 times at least that ball's going out of the back of the end zone. For most of the year as a punter, he was having the best statistical season that any punter at Texas had ever had. It dipped off in the final month of the season, but for most of the season, he was at Michael Dixon levels. And look, he was 85%, 86% in terms of field goal conversions a year ago. Those are strong numbers. I'm not saying Texas has to be that strong, but they can't fall off the mountain and end up they can't end up in the bottom half of the Big 12, because like you said, you get yourself into a touchdown game and it's like, well, hey, we're down by a touchdown, but you know what? If our kicker wasn't 1 for 3 and field goals, we'd only be a point behind. And then we'd only need a field goal instead of all of these little things contribute to winning and losing games. None of the stuff we're talking about is they have to be elite. That's the thing about all 6 things, right? We're 5 things in. Let's recap real quick before we get to the final 6 what we're talking about. Be among the top 3 or 4 quarterbacks in the Big 12. Don't have to be elite. You got to be good. You got to get maybe the biggest ask is 2 freshman offensive linemen to show up and not just be bodies, but to be good. Number 3, got to find a pass rush. Don't got to have 44 sacks in 2022, but you can't have 22. Find somewhere in the middle. You don't have to be elite, just be better. You don't have to be elite on defense, because I have some guys that can make some plays. And then again, you don't have to be elite in the kicking game. You got to make sure, though, that you're not a bottom half of the Big 12 team in the kicking game. None of these are huge requests. It's just that they all have to happen at the same time. I don't know what it means if 2 out of the 5 or 3 out of the 5 happen, but 2 of the other 2 don't. I mean, it probably leaves you in a position where you're 8-4-ish at that point and not quite getting to a 9-3, 10-2 that gets you into Dallas. My number 6 is something that I don't think we don't have to talk about too much. It's kind of obvious, but Texas got to get better coaching. And I think we did a video a couple of weeks ago where we focused on this, but Texas was a team I thought a year ago might not be playing. You remember when we were talking about early in the season and you thought they might lose to Louisiana and the Arkansas game, I tried to convince you all offseason long was scarier than it looked on paper. And we were like, no, that's a game that they should win. And I was like, yeah, but and we always bring up that Texas isn't 3-0 for like the last bazillion years.
Bazillion years, yes.
But the thought process was by November, one of Casey Thompson or Hudson Card would have grown up a little bit, and that this team would take to Sark, and that by the end of the year, they would be a team that you didn't want to play. And the opposite happened. They weirdly played their best football earlier in the season, with all due respect to the Arkansas loss, but everything else in that first month and a half of the season was really pretty good. And then they just fell off the map. And I think that's just disappointing coaching when the season just goes off the rails. And I don't think that's any kind of statement that any of the coaches would disagree with. They've got to do a better job of getting this team to win and play well all 12 weeks. Simple as that. And if they do that in itself, forget about everything else. I continue to maintain that if they get better coaching this year from top to bottom for 12 games, it's probably like a 7-5 team. And then it's like those other 5 things. That's how you get to Dallas. Feels like better coaching lifts this program up 2 or 3 wins by itself. Now it's about this other stuff and getting the fine margins on your side. I have high hopes that this coaching staff will do a much better job in year 2 than they did in year 1. And that's how you get to these issues with individual players come into play.
Yeah, Catch. I mean, I don't think it's any sign of disrespect to say, when you start from like the head coach that you've got to see improvement, right? I mean, it's at the end of the day, it is, a staff that inherited a winning program, a winning team, a team that had success. We're not saying great success, but success nonetheless, to a team that didn't make a bowl game. So it's easy to say, yes, there has to be improvement. It's no disrespect to say, hey, it's just a factual thing that Steve Sarkisian has never won more than 8 regular season games, throughout his coaching career. So, it's not disrespect to say, hey, you want to see him do better. If you're a Texas fan, you got to hope that all the things that you've believed and thought maybe you've learned from a guy like Saban will definitely help. You've got, assistants on this team catch. You've got 2 guys making over $1 million as assistants. Like, this is a high paid staff. And so at the end of the day, you can point to the problems, right? You can point to like, they have this issue and they have this challenge and they have this issue and that challenge. Well, that's what they're there to do, right? Catch. If everything was perfect, then anyone could do it, right? You're saying like, if I have a bunch of seasoned offensive linemen, a bunch of seasoned wide receivers, if I was stout on the defensive line, if I was stacked with a bunch of NFL talent as DBs and linebackers, yeah, man, I'd be successful. Well, shit, wouldn't we all? I mean, that's not what it's about. It's about taking what you have, and the good coaches and the great ones take what they have and they make it better, and they find ways to make it better. So that's what it is. It's taking what you have, taking the cards that you've been dealt with, not complaining about the cards that you've been dealt, but taking this thing and making it better. Now, to his credit, he's gone out and tried to find some talent, in the transfer portal. So he did go out and, we talked about it, Catch, but they did add in a bunch of skill guys where you talk about the Quinn Ewers or Billingsley, and you go down to Ryan Watts, and, clearly they just got added a Jai, is there, maybe O'Shawn Mathis. So they're adding in talent. Now it's just up to the staff to coach up what they have, get the most out of what they have. Catch, when they play outside of Alabama and Oklahoma, every team that Texas will play this year, technically, they have more talent than. I mean, right? That's fair to say, every other team. So that means 10 other teams you're going to look at and say they are more talented, whether you believe in recruiting rankings or not. These guys are technically more talented than the teams that they face. And it's at that point, it's about coaching. Anwar, are you sure? Yes. Technically, Texas had more talent than Kansas. So it's at that point, it's just about saying, okay, we've got the dogs, we've got enough to win. Now let's go pick our talented team, and now let's go out coach Mike Gundy. Let's go out coach, every other coach that's in the Big 12 that is, Dave Aranda. Out coach all the guys who have established themselves. You do that, and then you start talking about getting to the Big 12 championship.
Yeah, I think that you're right. Like, the thing is, you're right. Texas, when it comes to talent entering all of these programs, Texas has an advantage. I think the thing that in the last decade, I've spent a lot of time trying to learn and figure out is what it means to have that talent advantage. If you've got good coaching and really good people in place to develop that talent edge that you have, it's a big edge. It's on paper probably the difference between like 5 or 6 extra NFL level players on the field at one time. You know what I mean? Like that's what it should be when you're not good and at developing players at even a mediocre level. And I think it's safe to say for the last decade, Texas has been below average with regards to developing the talent that it brings in. And then it's not coached well. That talent advantage gets mitigated pretty quickly when facing programs who are really good at the thing that you struggle at, right? Mike Gundy can't recruit, hasn't recruited a day in his life as good as any head coach that Texas has had since you've been here. But it's almost as if he's like, go ahead, let them have a little bit of an advantage going in. I'll make up the difference. My players, I'll develop them better. I'll get more out of them than those coaches will. And then on game days, I'll be better than that guy. And so, this staff's it does have an advantage. I mean, nobody else in the Big 12 can say, what'd you do in the portal? Ewers, Nayor, Watts. I mean, if we just stop right there, that's 3 impact starters at important positions. Like, not everybody gets to shop at the Ohio State and Alabama tree, right? Like, Texas gets to go. What's it like? Saks Fifth Avenue has the off the rack store, but it's still Saks, right? It's like, yes, you didn't get it at the real Saks. You got it at the half off Saks, but you're still shopping at Saks. Whereas more times than not, the Oklahoma States and the Baylor of the world are getting their stuff at Target. And on paper, there's an advantage that should exist there, but you have to make that advantage count. What we're saying is the coaching on the field this year has to make those the advantages that Texas does have, they've got to make those count. For too long, it feels like basically every coach that you and I have covered for the last decade haven't done that well enough, haven't taken this advantage that they do have, and they haven't made the most out of it. Look, let's just leave it to those watching the video right now. Coaching, kicking, playmakers on defense, pass rush, the young offensive linemen standing up, the quarterbacks. You tell us in the comment section, what's the easiest of those 6 things to actually receive? What's the hardest? Of all the things that we've talked about, let me ask you, Anwar, and last question, because I don't know that I have a definite opinion on this. Of the 6 things, all kind of tough asks, but not impossible asks. What's the easiest and what's the hardest of those 6 things?
I think one of the easiest, especially if Mathis commits, I think that becomes the easiest of all the things. The hardest, I'm stuck between the O-line and special teams. Like, I'm stuck between that because I've always joked. I always told you, I feel like kicking is 50-50 no matter where they are on the field in college football. So, and I'm not going to go into that example that I've used before because I don't want to press one. I always feel like that one is the tough one, for me. I think I'm probably going to go special teams. I'm going to think
as the toughest.
I think I'm going to go as the toughest. I'm going to go and trust the scouting reports on these offensive linemen, everything that we've heard about them, knowing that it's not impossible for it to happen, and knowing that I think you and I would today say they can hit on at least one of those guys, potentially 2. I think kicking and punting that's always like a toss up for me. Even if they're good, that's a toss up for me. Michael Dixon was great. Cameron Dicker was really good. Following in that line, when you talk about a tough act to follow, those are tough acts to follow.
I think my easiest is find some playmakers on defense, because I do feel like, I've done this thing where I've counted guys that I think on that defense that I'll have a chance to play on Sundays. And look, I'll do it again. Pretty much the whole defensive line, I think, will have a chance. It's about, are any of those guys good enough to be better than 7th round picks and undrafted free agents? Can they be such good players?
Do you mean play on Sundays, or do you mean get at least into the NFL? Because on Sunday, you're talking about making.
I'm talking about making an NFL team.
Okay, so making an NFL team, potentially as a practice squad guy or higher.
I think no. I'm talking about making a team. I'm not saying 7 or 8 will. Okay. I'm saying they have 7 or 8 who could.
Okay, so from drafted to a free agent, undrafted free agent in that mix is what you're saying.
Look. I just want to make sure. If you told me on the defensive line that one out of Alfred Collins or Byron Murphy were all Big 12 this year, I'd probably just nod my head and go, okay. If you told me that DeMarvion Overshown was first team all Big 12 this year, I'm not flinching. It'll be like, oh, okay. DeMarvion finally did the thing that we've been kind of waiting for him to do.
Yeah.
If you told me that Anthony Cook or Jahdae Barron were all Big 12 this year in the secondary, again, I'm not flinching. Like, I think in a vacuum, spot by spot, they're all things that we can see happening. Can you see them all happening at the same time? And that's the rub, right? That's the tricky thing, is how do you get that kind of, but I feel like at least that's there. Like, I feel like, I didn't even mention Deshaun Jameson. I didn't even mention, O'Shawn Mathis, right? If he comes in, like, and you put him into the pool of, can this guy be an all Big 12 level player? He is an all Big 12 level player. I feel like they can find that. I think coaching for me might be, and I don't mean this as a slight to the staff, as much as we just talked about, you and I almost have a decade together where we keep having a Bill Murray Groundhog Day set of circumstances. Every year we say that Texas has more talent than the teams that they play against. So much so that before every season, we look at the schedule and we start counting wins and losses. And Texas fans love to say things like, well, tell me who's going to be the losses. Look at the schedule, find 3 losses. They do that every year. But it's always with the mental thought process of, we're more talented than them. And yet in the last decade, you and I, maybe 2019, or I guess 2018, the year they made it to the Big 12 championship game, like, maybe that would be a year where you would say they did that a little bit. But at least in 90% of the seasons that you and I have covered together, we've heard that thing. And yet the production from whoever is coaching at Texas hasn't been able to be at a level to compensate for how well the other teams are doing, developing their lesser talent. And so until I see it, it's hard for me to give the benefit of the doubt to the thing that seemingly only happens 1 out of every 10 seasons. So I think a lot of people feel like the coaching thing would be easiest. And like I said, I'm optimistic, but am I optimistic that they're going to coach at a level that we'll look at the end of the year and say, that was the best coaching staff in the Big 12, or that was one of the 2? No, typically we look around the conference and we'll go, well, Aranda did a really good job, and Gundy did a really good job, and so-and-so did a really good job of smoke and mirrors to get 8 wins out of that team. Nobody has ever been like, you know who the Big 12 coach of the year is? The guy at Texas. So,
oh my gosh.
Right?
When was the last time that Texas had that?
Matt Brown in 2009. So I'm just a little jaded in we always talk about this one thing and then it doesn't happen. So I think that might be the thing that I am like, maybe that's harder than it looks for reasons we can't completely explain. I mean, I wouldn't have thought this time last year that we'd be talking about players putting videos on social medias from the team bus and Halloween parties and just all kinds. Like, I just wouldn't have expected some of the things that happened. Maybe that's just my own opinion. I want to know, Onward, I want to know your opinions though. We've given you 6 things that if Texas can do those things, they're playing in Dallas in the Big 12 championship game. No doubt about it. There's no doubt in my mind, Onward, that if you tell me Texas has a top 3 quarterback, they get 2 freshman offensive linemen, they can hold it down. They find their pass rush. They find some playmakers. They've got a good kicking game, and they get better coaching. This team's playing in Dallas.
All right, one last thing, 30 seconds or less. What's the one thing you feel like you can remove and still think this team can play in Dallas? If it's not all 6, and you said one thing I can live without, and I still think there's a shot.
It might be the pass rush. Just because I can, if I got playmakers on defense, then I can, the pass rush thing's almost, twice as important because those other things don't exist. But if you had some of that, and then it was like, well, we've got guys that are really good on defense, we just don't have an elite pass rush. I think you could be okay. Because like you said, this team if you told me, okay, no pass rush, but the team at least has an identity on defense. Okay, well, that means at number 6, coaching better. That's happening. But I got to admit, kicking game. If you told me all of the other things happened and they were not good in the kicking game, I know that means that'll cost them a game at some point, but it might not cost them games if they're winning by double digits. And if all of those other things do happen, you're probably in a position where you can live with some shanks because you're not punting very much. Yeah. You can probably be mediocre in kicking field goals because you're scoring touchdowns. So it might be kicking game, except all of those other things have to happen in order for the kicking game to not matter. So I don't know. It's tricky. Look, again, leave your comments in the comments section. Like the video if you've learned anything or been entertained, or if we made you chuckle at all, like we would appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel. For Anwar Richardson and myself. And look, the Rogue Shop, not the Rogue, just rogueshop.com. Take advantage of the offer right above, like in the screen of this video. Get you some gummies. Sleep well tonight. Feel good. Look at Anwar's bottle. Does that look like a bottle that hasn't been opened yet? He's been digging in there and getting some of his.
Sleep until Wednesday if I take this. For
both of us, we'll see you tomorrow. You guys have a great Monday. This has been your Overreaction Monday show. You guys have a great day. Later.